thank you everyone for coming on an afternoon. We don't normally have addresses this time of year, normally we don't do absolutely anything at all. So thank you for coming and bothering to. For those of you who don't know, this is a joint event between University Conservatives Association Federation, which is a massive name, and the Durham University Conservatives, host Andrea Leadsom, of course, who you all know, long-time MP, former government minister, former leader of the House, two-time leadership candidate, all-round prominent figure. We're going to hear from her for a bit, then we'll have an opportunity for Q&A and to get some questions answered and hopefully have a good discussion. So, as I'll let one more person in, happy to turn over to Andrea. Thank you for coming.
Well, thanks for having me, and I agree, thanks for bothering to turn up. I mean, my 24, 22 and 16-year-olds certainly would not have bothered to turn up. So, yeah, well done. So I understand that you want to just know a bit about getting into politics rather than what it's like in politics. So I'll start with that. And I'm really happy to answer questions on anything, actually. But I'll just start with a bit of history. So I was 13 when I decided to become an MP. And the reason for that was the Cold War. So as a kid, I was the middle of three sisters, and we used to get government notices saying what to do in the event of a nuclear war, how to build a nuclear shelter. So it was terrifying, actually. You know, it would say things like there'll be loads of bodies that are unburied, and just like in a matter-of-fact way. So age 13, that frightened the life out of me. So it was a big event that made me think, right, I'm going to become an MP and save the world from a nuclear war. So if any of you want to show your appreciation that I've succeeded, then you feel free to do so. So I do like to take full credit for it so far. But of course, it's actually, going into politics, it's always either some major thing that you're really worried about, as it was for me, or it's just a sense that you just want to make the world a better place. And so being very young when I decided to do it, it then gradually dawned on me that actually the only way to really improve the world around you is if you roll up your sleeves and get stuck in yourself. So if you want a job doing, do it yourself. So that's how come I ended up, after a 25-year break from politics, which I spent in finance, so everything from treasury to corporate banking to funds management to corporate governance, which is all around the city. For those who aren't familiar with it, it's quite a kind of broad spread of jobs. But always that desire to change the world stayed with me. And I must say, actually, after 10 years now as an MP, I still kind of agree with my younger self that being in politics is the best chance you get at changing the world. However, even as a cabinet minister, it's still limited. So the frustration of not being able to do things as fast as you'd like or to the extent that you'd like always remains there. So if you're kind of burning to change the world, you do need to really think carefully about, is politics the way to do it, or is campaigning for something, joining a charity, you know, joining a multinational institution? There are different ways of doing it. So for me, I studied political science at Warwick, and in those days, Warwick was the most left-wing campus, extraordinarily. And when I was there, a certain Margaret Thatcher came to open the Arts Centre, and we had a pitch battle with the revolutionary communists. I was one of a small number of conservatives on campus, but the revolutionary communists were a force to reckon with. And so I remember a great battle of tomatoes and eggs and potato peelings and so on when Margaret Thatcher came. So it was kind of radical and fun, but at the same time, not very serious. You know, student politics then, I think, was much less organised than it is now. And one of the reasons I think for that is that we just didn't have social media, so it was much harder to organise people. So I think student politics is a real force to be reckoned with now in a way it wasn't then. So as I say, I came into politics as an MP 10 years ago, having tried from 2001 onwards to get a seat. So if any of you are thinking about going into politics straight from a degree, what I would say is, I decided not to do that, to have a career first. And I would always say that a bit of life experience before going into politics is really worthwhile. The thing with being an MP is it doesn't have any qualifications necessary to go into it, but everything that you do in your life you will find is amazingly relevant. So you kind of go in as a jack of all trades, and there are some things you find, you know, whether you just think, wow, actually the army's really interesting, I know nothing about it, I want to know more, or whether you think, yeah, it's all about the green recovery, I want to get into sort of the green economy and, you know, innovation and science and exports and growth, or whether you think, actually, no, I'm interested in reforming healthcare. All of those things, you can come into politics and be a total novice, and the resources here are amazing. You know, I mean, it makes kind of university pales into insignificance. As a matter of fact, it's really, really easy as an MP to get briefings on everything from incredibly knowledgeable people. It's a great privilege, the learning you can do here. And likewise, if you want to come to Parliament as a parliamentary researcher, and I've certainly, in the 10 years as an MP, every year I've had an apprentice from South Northamptonshire who's worked for me for a year, and it's been a brilliant experience for them. They've always been a school leaver, so an A-level 18-year-old, and they've worked for me for a year. They've usually gone on to uni, but sometimes to just to the world of work, and all have found it incredibly helpful. So that's another thing to think about, is maybe doing a year in Parliament and then going on to a world outside before you think about whether you actually want to be an MP. And then the final thing I would say is, if you're thinking about a career in politics, is it's always worthwhile thinking about local politics first. So put your name forward as a councillor, you know, either in your borough or in your district or county, because actually that is at a sort of more micro level, gives you the chance to see what it's like in politics, just to really find out whether you're going to enjoy it, because it's definitely not for everyone. But I always do remember when I was looking for a seat, and that took forever. It is not easy. It's amazing how you kind of, at one level, you think, why would anyone want to be an MP these days? But the reality is the competition is very, very fierce. So for me, I must have applied to about 115 constituencies, and in about 95, they just said, nope, go away, not interested. And then in about 18 or so, I got interviews. And in those days, there were 3 rounds. I think there still are. And so in about 10 of them, I got to the second round. In 7, I got to the final, and I was selected twice. Once for the second safest Labour seat in England, which I fought in 2005, which was great fun, because when you know you're not going to win, you've got real freedom to campaign and sort of try and uncover some wrong things going on in the local area. And then in 2010, I was selected and elected in South Northamptonshire as a new seat with a good Conservative majority. So I would say, get some political experience, but don't let that be all you ever do. But then you can find out if it's really the thing you want to do most, or if there's a better way to do it. So that's kind of a bit of a potted history. I would say being an MP is the best job I've ever done, for sure. It is incredible. And so for any of you with political aspirations, just go for it. Don't be put off by the hostility and the, you know, Twitter pile-ons and all of the talk of bullying and so on. There is a way through it, and it's a very collegiate place once you get here. You do make friendships across party boundaries. You know, I've got some very good friends on the Labour benches, even amongst the Scot Nats. So it's not true to say it's all hostility, although you'd think it was from the campaigning. But it's a very, very rewarding job. And the final bit I want to mention is being a constituency MP is probably the best bit of all, where you really do have this little magic wand that you can wave on behalf of your constituents. So, you know, perhaps one of my best memories of all time is when a couple came to me with their 7-year-old son, my final surgery before Christmas, so it was like a week before Christmas, and they'd said to me that they'd come here as asylum seekers, they'd got leave to remain, they were transferring to UK citizenship. They'd sent off their passports to get their permanent citizenship, and they'd gone into the big sort of black hole that is the Home Office. And so their work visas had run out, and that he was a security guard, she was working in a care home, and they were paying almost all they had for their 7-year-old to go to a little prep school because they felt the education of their son was so, so important to them. And they'd lost their jobs because effectively they had no right to work there. And they were both living with their little boy in a car. It was absolutely heartbreaking. a week before Christmas. And so we literally set to with my team and we sorted them out accommodation and got their passports back just by Christmas Eve. So that's the kind of thing you can do as a constituency MP, which is definitely the most rewarding bit of it. So that is my pitch to you, if you're interested, to go for it.
Well, thank you for that, Andrea. We have some questions that have been coming in via DMs. If anyone has questions as well, just on here, feel free to ask them, but I've got a few written down already. From myself, what was the experience of running for leader actually like? Because we always see, you know, the sort of public-facing experience of it, which is obviously not the whole case. What is it actually like behind the scenes, setting up a leadership campaign and running one?
Well, I had two tilts. The first one was, as one of my colleagues, Will Bragg, MP in Manchester, as he put it, it was like trying to build a jet engine as you're taxiing along the runway, because number one, I didn't think David Cameron was going to resign after the referendum, and number two, I was fully expecting to be working with Boris, so it was only when that all went wrong that I decided to put my own name forward. So there was no chance to prepare, and I think that showed, and it was extraordinary. I mean, you know, to end up in the final two, it was overwhelmingly busy. That's the thing I remember is, you know, because of the referendum campaigns, I think that was very different to any other experience, because I remember having two nieces who were both 18 at the time, who both asked me if they could come and get some work experience in Parliament, and I was sort of thinking, yeah, not much going to be happening then. So they were both in the office and they were trying to reply to about 30,000 emails from people saying, you have to run for leader, we voted leave because of you, you persuaded us, you now need to own it. So they were trying to reply to people, and more were coming in than they could reply to. So it was an extraordinary experience. It was, but really, the reason I put myself forward was because of the desire to say, you know, I was absolutely passionate about this and I will stand up and be counted. And the reason I withdrew was likewise because it was going to be a 9-week campaign, because Theresa May had so much support from the party, and because the markets were in turmoil and I was seriously concerned about what would happen to the economy with such a long campaign. So that, in a way, was a leadership campaign not like any other. And all of the, you know, the sort of stuff in the press and so on was a complete sideshow. It really was a straightforward, you know, having to stand and be counted, and then having to think of what was the right thing to do for the country. So you're right to point out that how it looks from the outside isn't how it looks from the inside. Last year, the leadership campaign was very different. You know, I'd spent 2 years determined to support Theresa May, having effectively, you know, handed her the keys to number 10. I felt a great sense of need to support her all the way through, come thick or thin. So I did that, even to the point where I felt, you know, we were really in danger of, you know, of reneging on the referendum. We never quite got to that point, and the point at which we did, I did in fact resign a couple of days before she did, because I felt we'd come to the end of the road, but I really wanted to support her. So again, I was very, very much behind the scenes, sorting out a leadership campaign, properly thinking about, you know, what is it I want to see in our country, and obviously proving that Brexit would be a huge success. But ultimately, for me, it's all about helping people to become the very best that they can be, giving them opportunities, supporting them to make the most of whatever big or small talents they have, whatever natural capabilities they have, to give people opportunities. So that was what my leadership campaign was about. And there I had plenty of time quietly with a really good team of colleagues and supporters. And, you know, I was really sad that the campaign didn't go further. But equally, I can see why, because the very strong Brexiteers in Parliament felt that I shouldn't have stayed in Theresa May's government. The Remainers thought I was a Brexiteer and therefore not worthy. And, you know, there are always various reasons. You know, politics is a very bloody business, and you have to hold your nerve, and you have to have quite broad shoulders. And actually, my one strong piece of advice when you're mucking about with things as serious as the leadership is you have to never bear a grudge. You know, there's too many people in politics who bear grudges, and that's something I feel, you know, you just can't let yourself do that, because you'd kind of disappear into a kind of a pit of self-pity or something, or anger, something unhealthy anyway.
Thank you for that. We've had a question from Ella, who's asked, since half of this year's academic teaching has been cancelled due to strikes and now coronavirus, do you think it is fair that students are still expected to pay full tuition fees for the year?
Yeah, no, I think it's really tough, actually, that one. And I mean, the problem, of course, is that it's not fair on the students who've not had the tuition. And actually, for many, even before the lockdown, they were also faced with tutors on strike and so on. So they weren't getting the tuition even before. So, I mean, I do think it's very difficult. You know, now that getting your degree is a matter of you are the customer, you are the paying customer. And whilst there is still a lot of taxpayer funding that goes to universities, nevertheless, you do have consumer rights. And if you're not delivered the goods, you should be able to argue that you want your money back. And I can completely see that. Equally, there is an issue with the infrastructure for universities that would be unsustainable if they had to sort of literally repay a whole year's, or at least, a term and a bit of tuition fees. So, it's nuanced. And I think probably, as I understand it, the government's position is that a lot of people should get their money back, but not necessarily everyone. And it does depend on what efforts the university has made to accommodate online learning for their students. However, that's on the tuition fees. On the rental costs, I think students in halls, some have been able to get refunds, and things like university gyms on. I mean, I've written a number of letters on behalf of my constituents who are studying away to help them to get rebates for rent, rebates for gym membership and so on. And I think that's absolutely right, is you can't just charge them anyway. That would be very unfair. What do you think?
I think myself and many other students basically agree with you. I know at Durham there was a campaign to try to get fees refunded. And I know they did refund some rent, but on tuition fees, they basically said the money has already been spent. We can't, the spending has been made with the assumption that we'll be getting full tuition fees, and therefore it's impractical for any sort of refund. At least at Durham, they have made an effort to do online teaching, but we'll see how effective that is really come the new term.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely difficult. I mean, frankly, the whole issue of education, because in effect, if you like, we've got the situation where the private schools have tended to kind of need to keep justifying the fees that they charge parents, so they've really pushed the boat out to provide online schooling. The state sector has been incredibly variable, and then the universities have again been incredibly variable. And so, there is a genuine question of, and likewise MPs, we've all been paid, thanks very much, taxpayer, and it is a very, very difficult issue, and there's no easy, and I don't think there's really a kind of straightforward answer to that question, I'm afraid.
Yeah. We had a question from Ben, who's asked, you've achieved a great many things in your career. What would you say you're proudest of at this point?
Well, I kind of veer on that, because just today, the government is announcing an early years review, which is the thing I'm perhaps most passionate about in politics, is giving every baby the best start in life, which in a sense would be to transform our society. So that I'm incredibly proud of the work I've done on pushing the early years agenda, so from conception to the age of 2, better support for families. But if I'm allowed to have a second bite, I'm going to say, as a shared endeavour, I am most proud of Brexit, because I do think it is going to lead to the most amazing future for the United Kingdom. I think staying in the EU would have really been disastrous for the UK in the medium term, not the short term, but in the medium term. And then, I'm being a politician here, I'm also going to have a third go, which is a personal actual achievement, and that is the independent complaints scheme in Parliament, which was a year of intensive work to create a confidential complaints process, which essentially means that I believe, will change the culture in Parliament from one of, do you know who I am? How dare you, do as I say, because I am an MP, or a Lord, to one of mutual respect. And so I'm really, really proud of that as kind of the thing that I managed to put in place.
Oh, brilliant. I think Aiden has a question.
Hello. So I think from my point of view, the biggest thing that politicians face is putting across the trustworthiness and accountability to the electorate that maybe can be quite hard when there's things that they have to overcome. You know, everyone from any politician, Boris Johnson's done a great deal of kind of covering up a few things that maybe don't look great in the public eye. How do you go about doing that? How do you go about achieving that public popularity in a way that kind of doesn't taint your character as a politician?
So, I mean, that is just impossible. And, you know, depending on someone's perspective, they will either say, well, you're evil and horrible and here's all the evidence to prove it, or they'll say you're amazing and fantastic and here's all the evidence to prove it. So, I mean, you can always, you know, all of us, every single one of us on this call can put a positive or a negative slant on someone or something and make it out to be good or bad. And unfortunately, living in the public eye, as politicians do, you know, beauty is in the eyes of the beholder. And so very specifically and practically, when you get a pile on, so I mean, you know, to use examples from my career, you know, when people sort of said, oh, you lied about your CV, for example, that was a big thing in 2016. You totally lied about your CV. It's simply not true. There is nothing you can do from a practical point of view. You can say, oh, no, I haven't. And they'll say, oh, yes, you have. Oh, no, I haven't. Oh, yes, you have. I like a pantomime. But what you can do ultimately is you can set the record straight, but that's going to be afterwards. And so there will be people, still today, people will tweet saying, yeah, well, you lied about your CV. And there's just literally nothing you can do about that. So practically, that's where the broad shoulders come in. And that's where you just kind of have to clock those things for future damage repair, if you like, and then you can set the record straight. And sometimes it's quite a long time into the future, which is actually why I think a lot of politicians end up writing memoirs, because they just have this natural human desire to tell their side of the story. And one of the hardest things I remember actually was when I first became a minister. So that was 2014, and until then I'd had a kind of moment of highlights during the LIBOR scandal when I was on the Treasury Committee, but prior to that I'd never really seen a pile-on, a kind of media pile-on. And when I became city minister, the press decided to say that because I have a brother who comes from Guernsey and is in owns his own funds management company, that he was an offshore tax evading financier. And they just went on this story, and I was just like, literally none of that's true. You know, his family have lived there for 600 years. Are you calling him a tax evader simply because his family happened to come from Channels? And anyway, he happens to be married to my sister, you know, who's nothing to do with me. And there was just nothing to be done. So I think all you can do is keep being the person you are and not allow yourself to be destroyed by the things that the sort of pile-ons and the accusations. And then actually, to be perfectly honest, the other practical thing I would say is I absolutely love talking to groups of people like you guys, because you're curious. So rather than just sort of getting me on to say, you're a stupid idiot, Mrs. Leadsom, you just always smile and you're so thick and you've done this and you've not done that. You're curious, so you're asking questions. So that actually in itself gives me the chance to say, well, here's how that happened and here's how this happened. So, you know, that I also think is quite good, because it does enable kind of politicians like me to get things off their chest. So thank you. Thanks for asking.
Thank you too.
Right, I believe we have a question from Ella now.
Hi, Andrea. I wanted to ask, because you've shown so much dedication throughout your career towards improving parliamentary proceedings and behaviour in Parliament. I wanted to know what your views are on lobbying, whether you think it's a problem in the UK. Obviously, it's a big problem in the US, and I think David Cameron said back in 2013-14 that he thinks it's the next big scandal yet to come. So I would love to know your thoughts on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think it definitely has its place. There's no question about that. I mean, you know, it's almost like free press. You know, you couldn't live without it, but it's hard to live with it. And lobbying in a way is the same. And the problem with lobbying is when it's not transparent. So, for example, I will get sometimes at my surgery, I'll get a constituent will say, can I come and visit you at your surgery? I want to talk about, you know, air source heat pumps, for example. And I'll be, yeah, delighted, you know, do come along. And they'll come along and they'll bring the head of public affairs from Air Source Heat Pumps Inc. And it's just like, what the hell? You know, this person has captured you to abuse my constituents' time, and you've fallen for it. But of course, that's a kind of, I think, totally unacceptable face of lobbying, where you just kind of like find a foot in the door and then you just try and, you know, market your product and unduly influence and so on. And then the other thing I think that is also problematic is the kind of online lobbying, where very often I will get a whole stack of emails, you know, 40, 50 emails, which are, you know, dear enclosed name of MP here in square brackets, which they've not bothered to fill out. What are you doing about blah, 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 whatever it is? And sign your name and address here, which they've not bothered to fill out. And then I get this sent to me. And this is a sort of a, you know, often actually a charity or a lobbying company or a sort of think tank or whatever that has sent this out to a bunch of addresses they have on their database. And they've encouraged people to send this to their MP. And then because I always reply to constituents, I will write back to them. And amazingly, a number of times people come back to me saying, why have you written to me about, you know, donkey sanctuary in the Cayman Islands? That was genuinely a campaign. And I'll be like, well, because you wrote to me. And they're like, no, I didn't. Oh, yes, you did. Here's the email. And they're like, oh, did I? Oh, okay, then. So it's a complete sort of pointless graffiti as well. So there are great frustrations, but it's the undue influence that is the problem. And I do think, as with all of these things, transparency is key. And where a person is lobbying, they need to absolutely disclose, I am being paid to ask you this question or to come along with you, or I have asked if I can accompany your constituent. You know, it shouldn't be that you are just sort of held hostage, and then kind of natural courtesy means you sort of need to hear them out. I mean, on occasion, I've been tempted to say, well, get lost then, you know, you've come here under false pretenses, I'm not talking to you. But kind of human courtesy requires you to not do that. So, yeah, it is a problem. What do you think, Ella?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't think there's been a lot really published about it online, or it seems sort of under the cover at the moment. No, I have no idea. So that's why I was really intrigued to ask. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, on the upside, lobbying is incredibly powerful. I mean, just today, actually, randomly, I was on a call with a company called Vertex, who are a US pharmaceuticals company, and they have the sort of monopoly, global monopoly on some brilliant products for cystic fibrosis sufferers that can literally extend your life expectation from age 31 to mid-60s. Their products are that good. And there's been this huge issue whereby NICE, who are the NHS's kind of assessor for whether it should be available on the NHS, have been in arguments with for about, 5 years plus over whether UK cystic fibrosis sufferers should have access to this. And there is a very powerful lobbying group on cystic fibrosis, and that actually has won the day. Vertex have put the price down, NICE have agreed to fund it, and literally in the last week or so, we've got the go-ahead to be the first to use their latest round of drugs, which for a number of, you know, kids in my constituency is going to mean the difference between, you know, barely living as to become adults and actually having a long and fulfilling life. So all credit to them for the good work they do.
Do you feel like you get a lot of expertise from lobbyists? So sort of it saves you time by giving you a lot of research, gets your facts in order. So they do have a benefit as well.
They definitely do. But again, they have an agenda. So another example, my husband chairs a homeless centre in Northampton. And I've had a lot to do with it. And it has a particular view of how to get people off the streets and back into work and, you know, a home and a proper life and so on. And they don't agree with Shelter, who as a charity, you know, it's this fine line between charity and lobby group. And Shelter are immensely powerful and have managed to kind of bombard everybody and persuade everybody that housing first, which is put someone into a house and everything will be fine. When in fact, you know, the Hope Centre, I mean, I don't have a professional view on this, but the Hope Centre says no, very often if you're homeless, if you're sleeping rough, not having a house is the least of your worries. It's your addictions, it's your traumas, it's your misery, your mental health issues, blah, blah, blah. And actually, if you just stick someone in a house, then that brings home all of their worst fears. And before you know it, they're going to be kind of climbing up the walls and leaving again. So actually, they just don't agree. But shelter have sort of won everybody's hearts and minds with effective lobbying. So they're very informative and very expert, but they, you know, if they're not quite right, or if they're not telling the whole story, that's where it gets a bit dangerous.
Thanks.
Right, we've had another question in. Do you believe schools should be opening sooner rather than later?
I think it's not about the buildings, okay? So again, drawing from my constituency, I've got 92 villages, little places, and a lot of my villages have what's known as small schools as a term. It means you've basically got, I think it's less than 100 pupils in the whole school. So a lot of them use village halls for things like the gym or a whole school assembly or whatever, and because they're in, you know, a converted house or whatever it might be. And so when they want to get everyone together, or for a play or whatever, they'll use the local community hall or the church or whatever it may be. So actually, for them, some of my small schools wanted to get all the children back, and they could social distance if they could use the community hall, and they weren't allowed to because community halls weren't allowed to open. So that was immensely frustrating, because the sort of the desire to do it was there. It was just that the venue wasn't. So I absolutely think, yes, schools should be opening sooner rather than later. But whether it's schools or whether it's that we should put our heads together and think about where you can actually have lessons. So you could have them outdoors. You know, in Northampton, we have this fabulous Royal and Derngate Theatre, 2 great big theatres, and they have a huge basement. So that's kind of like probably, I don't know, six socially distanced classrooms in the heart of Northampton. And then, of course, there's online, and then there's private tutorials. There's all manner of ways to deliver education other than the school. But at the same time, of course, for the well-being of children, I mean, my youngest is 16 and she is totally miserable to have not done GCSEs and not said goodbye to her schoolmates. She's not seen her, and none of you've seen each other, but you know, at that age and younger, it's actually quite awful to just not see your mates. You know, you just want that social time. So again, I think schools, you know, should be doing something to enable children to get together, at least to say goodbye. And again, you don't have to do that in the school. You could arrange it somewhere else. So yeah, I do think they should be coming together sooner. So I'm not speaking as a member of the government there, I'm speaking as a backbencher, because I know that the government has been a lot more understanding than I would be.
Yeah. Is there anything you think that could be done differently to make sure education is being maintained? Because I was reading a report just this morning that 50% of school children haven't had any teaching since March.
Yeah,
what do you think should have been done or can be done?
Yeah, so I mean, I was actually so very tempted to talk publicly about, you know, we could create kind of Nightingale schools. You know, we've got the Nightingale hospitals, and we could turn some big public buildings into opportunities for kids to be social distanced. And yes, okay, maybe 100 at a time, to have story time, to have you know, breakout groups and so on, to catch up over the summer. And also, you know, the whole, because education isn't just about can you do maths or can you read, it's about the socializing, and it's about actually time away from your parents as well, because, you know, a lot of kids who've not got any homeschooling have also been having the sort of traumas of difficult home life and so on. And I've got a lot of that from my constituency bag about, you know, parents who've just massively fallen out during lockdown, understandably, and the kids suffer always, and they can't escape. So yeah, I would love to see us doing some summer provision, and that, you know, definitely could be outdoor school. You know, you could have a park, you could have volunteers, you know, members of parliament. We've got the month of August, we could go and volunteer. I'd so love to do that, but it's just, you know, it's disappointing that we've just not, maybe there just isn't the bandwidth to organise it, but I do wish that we had.
Thank you for that. We have a question come in. Do you believe introducing compulsory face masks on the high street is going to further damage the economy, which has already been damaged by coronavirus?
The reality is, I don't know. So, I mean, I did any questions last Friday night, and the same question came up before the decision had been taken to make them compulsory from the 24th of June. And so, as I understand it, there really is mixed sort of scientific evidence about the efficacy of face masks, because if we were all back to back, sort of breathing that way, we wouldn't be at risk. We could even be touching back to back. And if we were side by side speaking that way, it's fine. Whereas if we're face to face, it's much more of a problem, or if we're shouting or whatever. So it's not just a matter of wearing a face mask good, not wearing one bad. So that's one issue. And so I think that the government had been undecided as to whether to go for it or not. Secondly is the issue of confidence. So I believe, having spent many years in finance, that confidence is everything. Confidence is everything for consumers. Confidence is everything for finance. Confidence is everything for business. So actually, if you are confident to go out because everyone's wearing a face mask, then let's wear them. But if actually the fact that everyone's wearing a face mask is making you nervous and thinking, well, I'm not going to go out there because if everyone's in face masks, that's a bit scary, then it's a bad thing. So, I mean, I don't genuinely feel qualified to answer that question, but I think it is going to be a sort of an on balance. The decision is taken of requiring face masks, that it merits it. But ultimately, really key to this is the social distancing. And so, again, if people are just not going to social distance, and there is, some evidence that, again, the population's divided. I get the people emailing me saying, this is all totally ridiculous and over the top. For goodness sake, grow up and let's carry on. When we had Spanish flu back in the day, we all died and didn't make a fuss. And then you get other people saying, why on earth are we even going out? I just want to stay home and never talk to anyone ever again. So you've got people at completely opposite ends of the spectrum. And ultimately what we have to do is get the economy going again. So we have to do everything possible to get people to feel confident and businesses to feel confident. Otherwise, we're storing up massive problems for the future. So it's not just about face masks. And in direct answer to your question, I simply don't know. I mean, I'll wear a face mask where I see other people wearing them, and if someone asks me to, I will always have one to hand. And obviously, where the government requires it, I will always wear one. But I'm just not going to try and give a professional opinion.
Thank you for that. On that same sort of topic, we've had a question from Daniel, who's asked, if the R is below 0, what should be... I'll read this. What should be done, if anything, to keep the R below 0, if not masks? What other things do you think should be tried?
Well, social distancing. I mean, I've sort of slightly covered that question. Obviously, social distancing is key to this, because if you're 2 meters away and if you're not coughing in someone's face, and if you're, 1 meter plus with a mask, then those things will all keep R down. So too will taking it seriously, so washing your hands and not shaking hands and not hugging people and all of the things. I mean, all of those things that we can all do. Businesses taking it seriously. So if you're a hairdresser or a gym, then actually not just paying lip service to the risk assessments, but actually fulfilling them and so on is going to be really key as well. And that's, there's going to be a lot of things to be done, whilst at the same time, we've got to let people get back to normal in their lives. So we've got to try and minimise the absolute disruption.
Thank you.
Can I just interrupt? I actually, because I mentioned this announcement on the early years, I've just had the Telegraph are looking to put some comments on their front page for tomorrow, but only if I can give them those comments right this very minute. So you'll understand my desire either to stop or to let you chat amongst yourselves and get back on in 5 minutes. What would be better?
We're happy to wait. It's fine.
Will you wait?
Yeah,
I'll
that's
talk
fine.
to you again as soon as I can. It'll literally be 5 minutes. He has to file right now anyway.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I'll be back in a sec.
Sure. Oh, here we go.
Hi.
There we go. Yes, we're back.
Thank you.
Right, where were we?
Sorry about that.
That's fine. Where were we? Were we in the middle of a question or? No, I think we just finished.
I honestly
question
didn't to avoid a question, promise.
That's fine. So we've had a question in from Ben about the Harry Dunn case.
Oh yeah.
Asking, for those of you who don't know, the Harry Dunn case in short is basically I believe the wife of a US military operator on a base here in Britain, driving her car on the wrong side of the road, hit and killed, I think it's a teenager or a young boy.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's left to go to the US, and now there's a fight over extradition and getting justice for that case, and Andrew's campaigned about that. What's sort of, I suppose, the latest update on that, and what do you think is going to be the result?
Yeah, so basically Harry Dunn was 19, riding his motorbike, as he always did, and Anne Secoulis, driving on the wrong side of the road, ploughed straight into him over the brow of a hill, and he died absolutely agonizingly, and his family are completely traumatized. And to begin with, Anne Secoulis was very helpful to the Northants police, and absolutely admitted she was driving on the wrong side of the road and it was a completely accident. She didn't mean to, of course not. But then about 3 weeks later, she went back to the States claiming diplomatic immunity. And it's very interesting, actually, from a learning point of view. So at RAF Croughton, which is in my constituency, there is a big US Air Force base, and all of the employees there have been given diplomatic immunity when they go about their daily work. But that diplomatic immunity has an automatic waiver if they are not involved in their day-to-day work. So theoretically, had it been Anne Secoulis' husband who'd done this, he would not have been able to claim diplomatic immunity. But that automatic waiver only applied specifically to the staff and not to the dependents of staff. So on a technicality, Anne, because she wasn't employed there but was the dependent of someone who was, there wasn't an automatic waiver. And so she went back to the States under diplomatic immunity. Now, we have an extradition treaty with the US. Our legal system, I would argue, is a lot fairer than theirs, having had some constituents who were extradited the other way and seeing how they were treated. And yet the Americans have refused to extradite her. She's been charged by the Crown Prosecution Service, and the Home Office have requested her extradition, and the Americans have said no. So what do I think will happen? I think the campaign will continue. It's totally outrageous. I mean, the American side, they are using a technicality. I mean, there's no way that diplomatic immunity between two such allies should be used to allow somebody to kill a UK citizen and then not face justice. I mean, if it was the other way round, we would not hesitate. I would absolutely put, next year's wages on the fact that there's no way we would refuse to send that person to face justice. So, I mean, it's completely bizarre that they've done that, and the campaign will continue.
What's the justification from the Americans other than claiming diplomatic immunity? Have they given any sort of reason?
Yeah, they say she has diplomatic immunity and they have never waived it and never will. So they sort of then say that because there's an automatic waiver, that doesn't count as a waiver. I mean, it is, it's untenable. And I have said so to the US ambassador. So I'm not kind of, saying anything new here. Pretty awful. And of course, the reality then is that for many people who live near the base, is they kind of say, well, what are we going to do about it? We're just going to say, oh, well, what next? So that's the problem, is nobody will let it drop. I mean, that's just unthinkable. So who knows whether if there is a change of president, maybe a new regime might see it differently. But they do seem to be arguing that they have never and will never waive diplomatic immunity voluntarily. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you for that. We've had a question from Sarah about Huawei. Obviously there's been a decision in the last few days on Huawei and removing that from our infrastructure by 2027. Do you think that's quick enough? What do you think needs to be done more broadly on that? What would you like to see basically on that front?
Yeah, so I was on the as business secretary when the original decision was taken to minimise Huawei's involvement. And so I'm very much aware that the issue with Huawei is firstly driven by, in a sense, commercial failure, because normally you would have loads of competition in something like provision of hardware and software for something like 3G, 4G, 5G. And so it is actually a commercial failure that means Huawei has got such a foothold in the UK anyway. And so that's one thing that we need to do urgently, is to create perhaps, or to help support the creation of, a consortium of companies like Ericsson and Nokia, and possibly, one of the South Korean mobile phone providers, to create a competitor to Huawei, because if that existed, then we'd be in a stronger position. But whilst that hasn't happened, we are in the situation where we can't afford to not have broadband, and therefore actually losing all of Huawei sooner than 2027 is simply not possible. And so that's the challenge that we face. And what's changed since I was business secretary and party to that original discussion is that the US sanctions on Huawei have meant that some of the technologies that Huawei would have to use will not be trusted. And what that means is that our advice from our own cybersecurity people is that we therefore need to be even more cautious about Huawei, hence the decision that's just been taken. So I think it's the right balance between minimising the risk but enabling the rollout of broadband to continue, because otherwise it would be a huge hit to, frankly, our way of life, let alone our economy.
Yeah. Thank you. We have time for one more, I'm told, which is from Aiden. So if you want to go ahead, Aiden.
Hello again. So I think for me, just going back to kind of the party and how things are going, the big issue is with engagement, and particularly in the youth. There's a lot being done more towards the higher age spectrum to get people voting Conservative. I think from a young person's perspective, you're definitely not cool to be a Conservative on campus. There's already a lot of stigma attached. And it would be nice to see the party doing a little bit more to engage young people, to help them, get them involved in student politics. I'm just wondering what you thought maybe could be done more than is currently going on, because that's really the reason that the association got together, to encourage speakers to come along and maybe help with funding issues.
Yeah, I mean, this has been a kind of centuries-old problem. Is that whole saying that somehow you have to be a socialist when you're young, because socialists are kind. I mean, that is just such rubbish. We absolutely want the same outcome, whether socialists or conservatives. It's just that the conservatives believe the way to achieve it is by giving people opportunity, ruthlessly giving them opportunity, enabling them to make the most of their lives and their education and their happiness and so on. And the socialist approach is to, centralise control and then dole it out, which to me is complete anathema. It goes against the human brain, it goes against the concept of work and supporting your family and so on. So to me, I grew up with a Conservative mum and a Labour stepdad who I love dearly in every way except for his politics. And I just, for the life of me, I don't know what it is, but I just can't see why anyone would be a socialist. It just doesn't make sense. But you're absolutely right. It is unfashionable to be a Conservative, and I went through it possibly even more than you at Warwick, where it was very left-wing and you were decidedly uncool if you were a Tory. So it is a big challenge, and so the brand is part of it. I do think David Cameron actually did a lot to make the brand more acceptable to young people, and I actually genuinely think Boris will too. But it's also really important that all MPs do things like this. I mean, actually, Zoom has been a great way to get to talk to lots of young people. I was talking to a young Conservative women's network last night, and there were 82 young Conservative women on Zoom. I mean, that's fantastic numbers. You'd rarely get that many in a room. Young people who could be bothered to turn up, sort of thing. And so, all of us have to make efforts to do that. It's also, of course, about social media and the better use of social media, and that I think is, I think I'm not sure that Labour politicians are particularly better at it, but I think maybe some of the old guard Conservative MPs who, no, I don't do Twitter, sort of give us a bit of a bad name, but certainly getting more into social media, which I promise you I'm trying to do. And just today, check out my latest Mr. Whippy boomerang on Instagram. It's very good, though I say so myself. But no, we do need to get better. And if you have any ideas, please ping them over. I mean, we need to be talking about the same things that young people talk about, and I do genuinely think that we do. So I am slightly mystified as to why it is so uncool to be a Conservative.
The social media side's come on leaps and bounds, I would say, in the last year. Some of the memes that have been going around, especially during the election campaign, I thought were very peak intelligence. So if you can just keep that up, and I'd say it would just be really nice, I think, to get a little bit more support from the Central Party and engagement.
I will feed that back. I will definitely feed that back. More banter.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. Unfortunately, we've got to end on that note, I think. Thank you for everyone for coming. Thank you, Andrea, for coming and answering so many questions. It's been a real pleasure. One of the best addresses we've had at DUCA in a long time, I'd say.
Well, thanks. It's been a real pleasure. Anytime, literally anytime. So keep in touch, guys, and really, really good luck to all of you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Have a
you.
great
Bye.